The Orville New Horizons, Season 3, Episode 7, From Unknown Graves. Well, in this episode, we definitely got background on the Kaylon and how they turned into genocidal maniacs. This episode starts with viewing a Kaylon in a home of, well, their originating biological species. It's clear that the Kaylon are becoming sentient. The biologicals aren't happy about that. The Kaylons are supposed to be these subservient things, these machines that just do work without question. Later in the episode, Charly Burke comes to the conclusion that this was slavery for the Kaylon. She gives them more thought because she finds out what the background actually is as to why they've turned into genocidal maniacs. And I will admit, it was unnerving watching that family torture that Kaylon. There were a few things about this episode that did rub me a bit the wrong way, unfortunately.
Yeah, this was another episode where I thought they tried to do too much.
Yeah.
There were I think at least 4 storylines going on in this episode. Yeah. And I thought that was 1 to 2 too many. The Kaylon one was the main one, and that was the most interesting of the 4 in my opinion.
I would agree. In this episode, yeah, because like the old man just said, there were a lot of storylines going on at the same time, which has been one of my complaints throughout this season, that yes, the episodes are a lot longer, but they're also trying to cram a lot more in there. And I mean a lot more than they would a regular episode, as in too much. They should really, at least in my opinion, be concentrating on an A story and a B story, maybe a C story, but it has to be a lesser story. But in this instance, they had 4 stories that were competing with each other in about an hour's time, and it's just too much.
That's why I didn't like the Krill episode where Talla was becoming the leader of Krill. Even though there were some good concepts in there, I just thought it was too packed with too much. And this was another one of those type of episodes where there was a lot crammed in here. A couple of weeks ago, we had The Tale of Two Topas. In fact, I don't know if there was a B story. I'm trying to remember. That might have just been about that and only that. And then last week, we had the Gordon story, which was the A story, and then Isaac and Charly Burke as the B story. I don't know if there was a C story. If there was, it was super minor. And those type of stories were just an A and a B, possibly a C story. Those work better for me because they're not trying to, when I'm sitting watching the episode, it's not trying to cram all this thing in my head. Because it's not like I think any of these stories that they covered in this episode here, it's not like I didn't like any of the storylines as far as, well, it could be interesting. But it just seemed like they were rushing all through all these episodes because 2 romance storylines, which I don't understand. I mean, I guess I'll wait till later, but I mean, I'm starting to have issues with this being more of a soap opera than an actual science fiction show now. Because Claire and Isaac, I've had enough of those 2. That doesn't mean I don't like the characters. We've already covered this storyline. We don't need to cover it again. But they're starting to date again. And you predicted this a few weeks ago. And I said, they're just going to be friends. No, you were right. They were telegraphing they're going to start dating again. I've been here. I mean, it just feels like we've been there, done this. We've been here already. Let's do something else. Especially when you're pushing this storyline, the Claire and Isaac storyline, along with 3 other storylines.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing too much at once means that they all suffer. None of them get the time that they deserve. And that's what my complaint is. And, yeah, I mean, you may disagree with me, and that's fine. I just feel like I wish that they would have concentrated on 2 storylines, given them all of the time. That way, everything could have been covered if they chopped it up into separate episodes.
Because the 2 storylines I think they should have covered is the Kaylon storyline. Obviously, that's the major storyline. And then they were negotiating with this new race.
The Genesee.
That could have been the B story. And that's it. You didn't need the Isaac-Claire romance stuff. You didn't need the Tala-Lamar romance or jokey. We'll get into that here in a little bit. You didn't need that. That was too much in this episode.
Yeah. So, in this episode, I told so many storylines, but the gist of it is the Orville was supposed to be meeting with the Genesee and negotiating with them in order to try to get them to join the Union. This is a matriarchal society. So what Ed and Kelly do is put on an act where Ed pretends he's just some male. Kelly's actually the captain. Her first officer is, I believe it was Tala. Charlie Burke is head of engineering. And who else was there?
Claire.
Oh. But
I just think there were a bunch of... Because engineering usually has some female officers in the background, and I just think they were allowed to continue. Because they did usher when the aliens were visiting Yaphet, and they were ushering the people, the males, out of engineering.
Yeah, and there was some interesting stuff with that. For instance, Bortus really took offense to this matriarchal society treating males the way that they did. He found that extremely offensive, which, was funny, but also profound at the same time.
Well, they covered, too. They were trying to hide Bortus.
Yeah.
Because that race didn't like Mocklans either, because Mocklans were a very male-leaning society. So there was some interesting play as they were just trying to keep Bortus just out of their eyesight, because there was a kind of a jokey scene where they were setting up the bridge. After the Genesee got on board, then Mercer and the rest of the crew were on the bridge, and they were doing their old positions. Mercer was sitting as captain, and then I think it was Kelly who pointed out, well, if they come up to the bridge, they're going to ask questions if we have males sitting in these positions. So, they were able to shuffle the other males around, but Bortus, they essentially said to leave the bridge because, there was no way to explain a Mocklan on the bridge.
Well, so. The other males got up and moved. Bortus just stayed there in his seat, and everybody's just standing there looking at him, and he's like, what? He did not want to leave, which I understand. Bortus is probably one of my favorite characters, especially the way that he has stood up for his daughter and defied Mocklan society over and over and over again. I thought it was fantastic the way he did not want to move for these Genesee. Kudos to Bortus, because he was right. Because in the end, they did get caught, the Genesee, when they revealed to the Genesee that this was all just an act and that Ed was actually the captain. The Genesee felt betrayed, as I knew they would, because this was a really bad idea. Fortunately, Kelly was able to come up with a similarity between human society and the Genesee society, as far as with the Genesee, the women were allowed, even in marriage, to have activities outside of the marriage, whereas the men were required to remain faithful. And fortunately, in her relationship with Ed, that's exactly what happened. She cheated and Ed stayed faithful. And it was through that common ground that the Genesee agreed to allow a representative from the Union, a female representative, to come to their planet. So at least that worked out in the end. And there was some hilarity involved. For instance, when Ed and Gordon had to bring in the luggage from the Genesee, from their shuttle, just the way they were trying to carry that luggage was just funny.
And making comments back and forth to each other, and no, go sideways.
Yeah, and at one point, one of the Genesee was asking Kelly if Ed was her mating partner, I guess, and she asked if she could borrow Ed for the night. And Ed really didn't want to do that. And then Gordon volunteered to take his place.
He said, I'll do it.
Oh, God. So, that was funny. So there was some really funny stuff in there, which was great. I live for the humor in the Orville. There were some storylines that obviously were not funny, like the Kaylon. And how that came about was that they actually discovered a scientist and a Kaylon on what they thought was an abandoned outpost. As it turns out, this Dr. Vilka, she found this damaged Kaylon, she and her father, and they did some work on him, and they discovered that they could actually activate emotions in his makeup, and so that's what they did. This Kaylon, his name was Timus, because she named him after her father, and he was a Kaylon who had emotions, and so this was interesting as far as how this would impact Isaac. Obviously, you knew it was going that way because that's just how this show is. That's how writing is. They wouldn't have brought this guy in if this wasn't going to be impactful for Isaac. So Isaac gets the same upgrade at first. Claire is super thrilled because here's Isaac with all these emotions telling her how much he loves her, etc., etc. He wants to be a father to her children and all of these other things that she'd been waiting to hear. And unfortunately, that didn't last very long, and the pathways in Isaac's brain burned out because he was a later model than Timus. This was apparently a flaw that the Kaylon had amended in the design before they built Isaac. So the emotion portion circuit, I guess, of his brain burned out, and that was it. No more emotions for Isaac.
And there was a dilemma, too, because they said, the scientists said, well, we probably could make this work and retrofit his brain like a first-generation Kaylon, but the consequences would be that we'll have to wipe his memory.
Yeah.
And so there was a dilemma there where Isaac was volunteering for Claire to have his memory wiped, but then Claire wouldn't allow that because he wouldn't be the same Isaac without the memories.
Yeah, she wasn't going to give him a heart with the expense of his soul, which, you know, at least she recognized that. But the relationship between Claire and Isaac just makes me so uncomfortable because she just spends all of her time just, I don't know, it just seems to me trying to get him to love her, I guess, or admit that he has feelings or something like that.
Well, it's weird.
And then here he finally got some, and it seemed to be everything she ever wanted. I'll be interested to see where this goes now that she knows that, you know, he had these emotions and it's not going to happen again. I don't know. I don't know where this goes from here.
Well, it's weird because her ex-husband that we met, I think in episode 2, part of the reason that they separated was that he had his work and he didn't really... Claire was supposed to stay at home and be there for him for companionship and whatever else, but he went out and did his own professional thing.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't understand is Isaac, although he's trying, I'm not sure he's any more available than this guy was.
Well, obviously he's completely 100% emotionally unavailable because he has no emotions. I said this in our review of the second episode. It was disturbing to me that Claire seemed more concerned about fixing her relationship with Isaac than with forgiving her ex-husband for something that had happened, 20 years earlier. I knew in that episode at the end when she asked Isaac to sit down and have dinner with her, I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to get back together with Isaac. It just seems so unhealthy.
And see, that's what I don't understand with this series. When they were exploring this in season 2, the relationship between Isaac and Claire, I was okay with it mostly because, one, they were putting a humor spin on it, and two, that I could see where this was Claire. We didn't know about Claire's history, but we kind of got the impression that she had a bad relationship in her past. So her latching on to Isaac, I thought, was an interesting exploration of human beings and loneliness versus is this really a companion for you? But now there's like nothing interesting about this. This is just like two people dating. There's no sci-fi element to this. This is just two people dating. One's just emotionally unavailable and one seems, I want to be careful, but Claire almost seems like she's needy, like she needs Isaac to love her back. You were right about this. After that second episode, and he sat down with her, Isaac did, and you said, "Oh, they're getting back together," and I was like, this is just a friend thing so far. Let's not get worried. Well, you were right. I felt between this and then the Tala story you haven't talked about yet, those stories were unnecessary. I don't understand.
Well, let's talk about the Tala and John story. In the previous episode, we saw that John and Tala were in a romantic relationship. And in this episode, we see the consequences of that. John keeps having to go to sickbay with broken bones, dislocated joints, all sorts of issues. And he keeps telling Claire that it was some sort of training program. And a few times it was funny, him trying to explain this stuff, him hobbling down the corridor, him trying to hide what was really going on. But by the end of the episode, Tala is breaking up with him because he is getting physically injured every time they're intimate with each other. At one point, she's trying to break up with him. He talks her out of it. Then they go at it again, and he's injured even more this time, and he finally admits that they're just going to have to call it quits because he can't keep doing that.
Well, they played it for comedy. The whole running gag there, because there was one instance where he broke his pelvis and his leg or something, and he was hobbling down the hall, and Isaac was going to help him, and then like Isaac said something like, maybe I should summon assistance, and he said something like, no, don't do that. No.
Isaac wanted to carry him.
Oh, carry him.
He said, nobody needs to see that.
At the end there, when Lamar basically admitted that, yeah, you're right, Tala, we're going to have to break up, and he like spit some teeth out, and I admit that was funny, but then after that, you had Tala crying, and the first thing that came across to me is, what if the sex of those two characters was reversed, and it was the male that was damaging the female? Would this be funny?
No.
Although I thought it was kind of Futurama, what was that, Snoo Snoo?
Snoo Snoo, yeah.
So there was a little bit of that, and I admit, there was a part of that running gag in this episode that was funny, but then that very last scene where he spit the teeth out, which I did laugh about, but then she's laying next to him in bed crying, and I don't know how that was supposed to be comedic, especially when this topic was covered with Alara back in season 1 when her and Kelly talked. Well, there's a few instances, but the first time I remembered it was when she was talking to Kelly about just having trouble dating men. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an interesting way to explore gender roles and, how many men would be uncomfortable dating somebody who's much, much, much stronger than them. But this sexual gag they were playing, because that's all this was in this episode, was they were having intimacy, and, she was just too rough for him just because of the high gravity stuff. I don't know. I mean, to me, I laughed until I stopped laughing, and then after I stopped laughing, I started thinking about why I was laughing, and I'm like, I don't think the way they ended this left a good taste in my mouth. No. I was actually uncomfortable with that very last scene when he spit his teeth out, and then she's crying in the bed next to him. That wasn't funny at all, and I think they were trying to play that for laughs. Yeah, the teeth spitting was funny, but her crying next to him, he spit his teeth out, he's like all bruised and everything, he says he has to go to sick bay. I don't know, to me that last scene didn't work for me, except when he spit his teeth out, and that's probably just because it's a physical gag. The rest of it, I was very uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they were trying to do here, but it really didn't work for me.
No.
I mean, going back to the Kaylon story with the emotion thing, one of the things I've accused the Orville of in the previous seasons is kind of borrowing from older Star Trek episodes, and that whole emotion chip thing that they were doing here. I mean, it reminded me a lot of Lore and Data, except in this case, Lore was it Timus, I think was his name? He wasn't evil. He was actually at face value what he looked to be. This just reminded me it was going over the same ground that Data and Lore did. It wasn't exactly the same, but I've been kind of harsh with Strange New Worlds when they seem to borrow from other iterations of Star Trek. And this felt a little bit to me like it was touching on the Data and Lore stuff. It wasn't to the point where I would say they were stealing, but at the same time, I have to be honest and say, yeah, there was definitely a feeling there of the Data Lore stuff and the emotion chip that Data tried to put in, but his body rejected it. That was very similar to what happened to Isaac. So that was a little bit too similar for my tastes, even though the direction they went was a bit different. But, maybe I'm being too nitpicky here.
No, I don't think so. Because like you said, we've covered this territory before. And if I'm going to call it out when Strange New Worlds does it, then I have to call it out here too. I mean, at least there seemed to be some development with that Charlie Burke character when Timus apologized to her for what happened. She finally, I think, understands why the Kaylon feel that they have to exterminate all biological life. But at the same time, it felt like it was too easy of an answer for her behavior this whole time, if that makes any sense.
Well, that's when in the first episode, Electric Sheep, I mentioned in our review that I thought they were going to have throughout the season where Burke was going to start figuring out that Isaac wasn't the same as the other Kaylon. And throwing in this Timus thing was a little bit of a curveball. But I didn't feel like the way this was handled with a quick, there's a quick revelation here, all of a sudden Burke's able to understand. That didn't feel organic to me because it was a quick hitter. And, I mean, I'm going to be honest here. Ann Winters is just not a good actress. So this could have been the interaction between Isaac and Charlie Burke. That could have been a good moment, even if I thought it was rushed. But Ann Winters just isn't a very good actress.
Yeah.
And so I was being pulled out of the story by her being a bad actress. I'm not blaming her for being a bad actress. What I am blaming is probably Seth. He's putting this actress in positions to carry dialogue that her ability is not there. She can't handle it. She's not that good of an actor to be given the amount of lines that she's given.
I am left wondering at this point, is he trying to get her to dump him? Because I can't otherwise explain how he could write such a terrible character. I mean, he must know that that's a really terrible character.
Well, it's the worst. I mean, I made the joke last week, and it applies so much now. She's Wesley Crusher 2.0.
Yeah.
All the other characters on the Orville are well thought out. Even his other ex, Alara.
Mm-hmm. Much better character.
That was a good character.
Yeah.
I mean, Alara is one of my favorites of the Orville.
Yep.
But this Charly Burke, she is the worst character on this entire series.
Or did Seth not write this character? I mean, that's the other question.
Yeah, there's rumors
Who actually wrote this?
There's rumors that he's busy with other projects, and he was during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So was this some other writer that came in and developed this character for his girlfriend?
I don't know.
Because this character, it really feels the same as Wesley, where Wesley never felt like all these other characters the Next Generation had were like these deep characters, and the actors were good. And then you had Will Wheaton, who is not a very good actor, and his character was annoying and paper thin.
Yeah.
And that's really what Charly Burke is. Yaphet has far more depth than Charly Burke. I'm not exaggerating at all, because Yaphet is I like Yaphet. I feel bad that we lost the voice actor, because I'm going to miss that character.
Yep, Norm Macdonald, even though he wasn't physically on the screen, what he was able to do verbally and through vocal
inflection.
Yes, inflection, thank you. What he was able to do there was so much better than what Ann Winters can do with her whole body being on screen. I just don't understand.
I mean, Ann Winters, the way she plays the role, it's not quite as bad, but it reminds me of the old 60s Dragnet with Joe Friday. Because she's not quite that monotone, but she's pretty monotone. Joe Friday, again, I don't know how many people remember the old 60s, not the black and white ones, but the 60s one, where they were super cheesy. Well, Joe Friday, not only would he talk very monotone, but the way he stood was just awkward. You could tell it was an artificial way he was being placed. And Charly Burke has a lot of that same presentation to her. I don't know. I've never seen Ann Winters in anything else, so I don't know if this is just the edge of her acting range or if they're purposely writing her character.
Well, that's what I've been asking. Is this on purpose to get her to dump Seth? Like, that's what I keep coming back to, because how else could this character be written so horribly? Like, if I did that to someone I was involved with, I would fully expect them to break up with me. I mean, that would be the point of writing such a terrible character, when it's obvious that all of the other characters that I have conceived are all fantastic, and here's this one that's awful. Come on, I mean, what other conclusion can I come to? I mean, it's either that or he didn't actually write this character, one or the other.
Something's weird, because all the other characters are interesting.
Yeah.
Lamar was probably the least developed up until this season, but they're working on him. I mean, he's had his moments. And it's too bad, because going back to the story for this episode, the whole Timus apologizing and explaining to her so she had a better idea of why the Kaylon did what they did, with a better actor, that could have been a huge payoff. I still think it would have been rushed, but still, it could have been a huge payoff. But this actor, like I said last week, every scene she is in, she's like Michael Burnham. She brings the scene completely to a halt.
Yeah.
At the very end of the episode, when she was talking to Isaac, the pretext was, hey, Isaac, can I help you with? They were doing some calibration, or he was doing some calibration in engineering. And he said something back, which is typical Isaac. No, because you're a human being, you're less efficient than me, and you'll do a bad job, or something like that. And so then they had a quick talk, and then she was going to walk away. But then Isaac realized that he wanted to spend some time with this human being, probably due to that whole emotion ship and everything. So then he called her back and said, well, maybe I could use your help. With a better actor, Isaac, and this Charly Burke character, I could see where that could be interesting. But Ann Winters just is so cold in the part. And I know it seems like I'm being awfully harsh, but at this point, it's not just one bad performance. This person has put in and I'm going to try to defend her here, she clearly doesn't have the ability to carry as many dialogue lines as they're giving her. And I'm an amateur. So somebody who works in Hollywood should be able to tell this actor this is beyond their range to cover.
Yeah.
So they should limit. You could still have her on the bridge, and she could be a bridge officer and do whatever she's doing up there. And occasionally you could have some side stories with her. But this would be like having massive stories centered around Wesley Crusher.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't work. The actor didn't have the range, and honestly, the character really wasn't all that interesting.
Yep.
I feel badly that it seems like this is the pick on Ann Winter's video cast now, or video review. But stop giving her so big of a role.
Well, I will stop picking on her for a moment, and I'm just going to pick on the story itself. And as much as it pains me to say this, God, we have been living with my mom for several months now, waiting for an apartment to open up for us. So I get to watch a lot of shows like Father Brown. It is, it's a British show. The actor who played Mr. Weasley in the Harry Potter films plays a priest, and he solves mysteries, murders, whatever. In the episode I got to watch this past weekend, much to my chagrin, there was a similar situation to what Isaac and Charlie Burke have been going through, except in this episode it was a German man and a Polish woman in the 1950s. The way that this show went about the two of them finding common ground and her being able to find it in her heart to be kind to this German man after she'd lost her family in the war. It was so much better done than what the Orville did with Charlie Burke and Isaac. And that made me very sad, because here's a show that did this a long time before the Orville got around to it, and they did it better. And obviously, this is something that we have seen in a lot of shows, largely post-war, when you're dealing with that. Obviously, after World War II, that they had to deal with that with, Germans or Italians or Japanese, things like that, from an American perspective anyway, or even from a British perspective. Yeah, but we've seen this, post-Vietnam. If anybody used to watch the original Magnum PI, that dealt a lot with this. These are not new concepts. Having to deal with people who come from a country with whom you previously were at war, and you may or may not have lost some family members due to that war. And there are people who will blame the people of the other country because they lost loved ones. I've seen it done better, and that makes me sad, because when you write something, you should be contributing something new. You should be doing something that hasn't been done before, or improve upon what has been. I just felt like this just fell flat for me. So I was disappointed. And I know probably a lot of people aren't going to like hearing that, but this season for me has just been so disappointing. I really enjoyed seasons 1 and 2, and the majority of this season has just been a tremendous letdown. In a lot of these episodes, I feel like they try to do too much. So all of the stories that they're trying to cover within that episode suffer because of that. This, I think, is another instance of that, because there were, 4 storylines going on in this episode? Maybe 5, depending on how you count things. It was just too much. Just too much. Yeah. And the stories are suffering for it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Could I get used to this season having very little comedy? Yes. Could I get on board with this series being a drama? Yes. I even said so in the early episodes of the reviews of this season. Mm-hmm. The problem is, if you're going to pull the comedy out and you're going to put drama at the forefront, well, now you've got to tell good drama. It's not a matter of, in seasons 1 and 2, you could have some dramatic pieces, but the comedy would still kind of distract people from picking apart the drama. Because I've seen people in our own comments, they think we're too harsh this season. Geez, it's just a comedy. It's a parody of Star Trek. Why are you... Well, this season, they're not treating it like a parody of Star Trek. So if you're going to go to the plate and you're going to take a swing for the fences, you better get a piece of the ball.
Yeah.
Right now, what they're doing is so up and down. There has been things in this season I've liked. There's been things in this season that I haven't liked. And there's been a lot of shruggy shoulder blah.
Yeah.
Now, I understand. Compared to Strange New Worlds, even the lowest of lows of this season is still so much better than Strange New Worlds. So let's not get confused that I'm saying this is like Star Trek Discovery type bad or Strange New Worlds. But I also am disappointed because if you're going to go drama, then you have to take care with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You have to develop characters. You have to make me want to get into this drama. The closest they did for full drama, The Tale of Two Topas, that was probably their best dramatic outing, not just this season, but the entire franchise. But that was the only one that was basically not really comedy. It was a straight drama take, and they actually did a pretty good job with it. Last week's, if you recall, we enjoyed the Gordon part of it, which was played straight drama. But then the comedic Charlie, Burke, and Isaac, it didn't work. The story was ridiculous, what they were doing anyway. It didn't make a lot of sense. I mentioned, why are they screwing on Earth when they could go to Mars or something and get some more Dysonium? I'm at this season now where, yes, they're cramming so much into here. It's like a soap opera. We've had 2 soap opera. Maybe that's being cruel because soap operas can actually be decent if that's what you're looking for. We've had 2 melodramatic pieces this episode. You had the romance between Isaac and Claire, which you could say was kind of tied to the emotion ship, but still it was a legacy from their previous relationship. And then we had this Tala and Lamar. Did we really need to have this one episode have 2 romantic threads in it when it was already packed with lots? Because as I said at the beginning of this video, if they would have had an A story of finding Timus, the Kaylons, and finding out more about their history, and a B storyline of dealing with that matriarchal society, that would have been plenty to do an hour episode for.
Yeah, definitely.
If you slowed down and did it right.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's not like I disliked this episode, because I actually did like it, but I don't know if I'd go back and rewatch it.
No.
It reminds me a lot of the Krill episode, but there was so much crammed in there, I didn't want to go back and watch it because they slopped through it. They didn't take their time and tell, if you're going to do drama right. If you're not going to do drama, then put the comedy back in and let's just have the hybrid that we had before. Mm-hmm. This episode was okay. That's the best I'm going to say. Last week's with Gordon. Gordon was a much stronger performance with him and his family and that whole time dilemma than this episode. There was nothing in this episode that I thought was well done.
No.
And I mean, kind of a side piece of trivia, because I mentioned this. One, we saw that pterodon again when the matriarchal shuttle was coming in. And I was right. That thing's in the way. So, I mean, I don't know if that's an in-joke they're making, like, ha ha ha, but they should move that thing to the back of the shuttle bay. And 2, I think a person will only understand what I'm saying here if they were familiar with Doctor Who. But when Doctor Who re-began in 2005, there was this episode in the second season, 2006-ish, I guess, the first David Tennant, where they visited this planet called New Earth, and they had this hospital with these cat nurses, sisters of something. I don't remember the order they were in. The scientist lady they had, just kind of the makeup they had on her, reminded me quite a bit of that type of filmmaking from the I guess, mid-2000s. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying they copied anything. It just kind of had that feeling. It had the bright colors. It had the similar shape to the head. And I was smiling for a while because I remember when television used to be fun. And, you know, Discovery and all that CBS stuff stole that from me. And the Orville, when they were comedic, brought that back to me. And even in this episode, when they were doing so much drama, having that one scientist lady where just the makeup kind of looked like if somebody said that was the same person who did the New Earth makeup, I would nod and go, yeah, I can see that. So that was like a good point for me that probably I'm the only one that got this out of this episode, is just the makeup on that scientist reminded me of the makeup they did for that nursing order on the New Earth episode of Doctor Who.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with the episode. I just thought I would share because that's what I was thinking of when I saw the makeup job done to that lady.
Yep. Again, a much better time in television back in like 2006. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about this.
I mean, I guess just to make it clear for me, and then you can follow up with your take. So my summary of this is this was an okay episode, but there was too much shoved in here. Mm-hmm. So although I'm giving a recommendation, it's lukewarm because this wasn't a standout episode for anything, in my opinion, other than the Timus stuff and getting some background on the Kaylon stuff. Because that was actually pretty decent when they were dealing with that, the flashbacks, how those Kaylons were being abused. And then finally, when the Kaylon had enough of it, and he basically murdered the entire family in their sleep. That was quite the tone change. Not only did the Timus kill the 2 adults, but he went in the bedroom and he killed those 2 children because they were torturing him too.
Was that Timus, or was that... Because it was K1 who did that, but I don't think that was actually Timus.
Yeah,
it was...
Yeah, you're right. That's correct. The Kaylon that they had killed the 2 children. That's a good point.
I'll admit, I actually cheered when that K1 killed the whole family. They had it coming.
So the Kaylon part of the story is worth watching. The other 3 stories, I mean, the matriarchal story, that was funny. They actually had some comedic moments with the luggage carrying. The Isaac Claire stuff and the Tala Lamar, I could just skip over those pieces and feel like I'm not missing anything. So this was a very average episode for me. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would say I would give it a 3 out of 5. I would say definitely watch it, but for me, there is almost zero rewatchability for this. Like, maybe if I cut out the K1 stuff and made that like a mini episode of its own, that would be worth watching again. But otherwise, like as a whole, yeah, I don't need to watch that again. So still better than Strange New Worlds. But as far as, evaluating is an Orville episode compared to seasons 1 and 2, I'm just not impressed. Anyway, I would love to hear what everybody else has to say about this. Did you feel the same way that we did? Did you see anything else in there? I know there's stuff that we didn't really talk about, like a conversation between Kelly and Claire. Kelly encouraging Claire to encourage Isaac to get the emotion chip, or whatever you want to call it. That was interesting, and I know we didn't cover that. Now, if anybody else wants to talk about these things in the comments, we're all for it. So anyway, now that there's no more Strange New Worlds, we will do this again after the next Orville episode.
Take care.